Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, David. How you doing today?
Good. Doing good, Bruce. So we're heading into the second season for the Oilers, the off season, when all the key moves that will make or break the Edmonton Oilers in this year and in years to come, depending on length and term of contracts handed out, are going to be dealt out. And both you and I are kind of going through a process of looking at Ken Holland's record again. You know, what he's done, which is what I'm more focused on, and what he might do, which is what you're kind of focused on right now. So in terms of what has happened, because that kind of gives a picture of what you might expect going forward. I've been looking at the draft record of Tyler Wright and Bob Green, who are the two people who are in charge of the Oilers amateur draft, Bruce. Entry draft, it's been called in the last 20 years, as it's been known for forever.
Just called the draft now.
Just the draft, eh?
NHL draft.
So when you look at scouts' records, it's one of the hardest things to judge, because you really don't know. Like even 6 years, like just for instance, here's an example with Tyler Wright. So in 2013, with the 14th overall pick in the draft, they drafted Alexander Wennberg when he was in Columbus. And Wennberg looked like he was just a brilliant pick for a few years in Columbus, and he earned this major contract.
Yep.
And then he just tanked. He looked like he wasn't an NHL player for 2 or 3 years. Just horrible. This year he gets traded to Florida, and he has a bounce-back season. He gets 17 goals in 50-something games, 52 games, I think it was. And again, he looks like, second line forward maybe in the NHL. And so even someone drafted 2013, in evaluating that pick, it suddenly seems different than it seemed a year ago. So this is a fraught process, and it's fraught in another way. Tyler Wright was the head of Columbus drafting for 2 years, and then in Detroit for, I think it's 5 or 6 years.
6 years, eh?
6 years. And Bob Green was with the Oilers, and he's been a scout for a couple of years. Then he was in charge of things for about 3 or 4 years. And then last year, he's the chief scout, but he's not. Tyler Wright's over him. So you don't know who to give credit to. There's all of these different scouts. Yep. There's the opinion of the GM. Sometimes it's rumored there's the opinion of the owner. And all of these things, that's a subtweet. All of these things go into who gets picked. So to put it on one person it's a little bit iffy, isn't it? But all of that said, when you're the person in charge, when you're the director of player personnel or the chief scout, the buck really does stop with you, and you're held responsible for what happens, and that's how it goes. So we're going to be giving credit or blame with all of that in mind when we look at the draft record of Tyler Wright and Bob Green. Since Wright is the man in charge, Bruce, let's start with him.
Sure.
When you look at his draft, we'll start with his 2 drafts in Columbus, his first 2 years in Columbus, Bruce. It was the infamous, for Edmonton Oilers fans, 2012 draft was his first draft.
Right.
At the helm. Columbus had the second pick, and they drafted a player by the name of Ryan Murray, who will ring a bell with Oilers fans, because that same year, Mark Spector's done reporting on this, I believe, the consensus of the Oilers scouts was to take Ryan Murray first overall. That didn't happen. The Oilers drafted Nail Yakupov instead.
Right.
And so that Columbus, with the second pick, they decided to take Ryan Murray. And in doing so, Bruce, that year in the draft, there were a number of really strong defensemen that they could have taken at the top end of the draft. There was Morgan Riley, Hampus Lindholm, Matt Dumba, Jacob Trouba, Griffin Reinhart, Derek Pouliot, and Slater Cuckoo. These players were all drafted in the top 10 this year.
8 defensemen in the top 10. I remember it well.
And Columbus took Ryan Murray, who obviously was highly esteemed in Edmonton. I think a lot of teams, I think it's fair to say, in the second position, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of teams would have taken Ryan Murray that year. There would have been the odd team who probably would have taken Morgan Riley, maybe, or maybe some would have taken Hampus Lindholm. You never know, right? Some
Right.
of them might have had other players rated ahead of Ryan Murray, but he was, I think, the consensus top defenseman in that draft.
There were some scouts in Edmonton apparently that had Griffin Reinhardt on top of their list. And as you know, they subsequently did go out and get the guy. But I think Ryan Murray would have been the, I don't know, I mean, he wouldn't have been unanimous, but he would have been the consensus among them. I'm sure if you went back and looked at the rankings before the draft, you'd see Murray right up there. And I mean, he's played 395 games, Ryan Murray, and all I can tell you is that if he hadn't had a bunch of injury problems, he'd be way over 500 by now, and he'd probably have, a lot better results. Events subsequent to the draft really impacted that pick. So it's hard to say, well, they blew that pick because they didn't foresee him getting hurt a bunch of times, and that's kind of hard to do.
He was injured in his draft year, but um, that's a fair comment, Bruce. The fact is, he's only had 2 healthy seasons since there's only one season when he played all the games,
Mm-hmm.
and he's missed significant parts of 5 seasons with injuries.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really been hammered
Right.
hard by injuries. When he has played, he's not been a power play guy. He's never worked out as a power play guy. He seems to be kind of a second pairing defenseman, playing 19, 18, 19, 20 minutes a game, kind of, Adam Larson minutes. I think he's used on the penalty kill and at even strength. Kind of, I don't think he's third pairing. He's a cut above that, at least on Columbus. So I think he's a decent defensive, kind of defensive puck moving left shot D man when he's healthy. But that's very rare for him to be healthy. There was a couple, for a draft to work out, Bruce. What I think kind of the standard is when you have a high pick, you really, it's not fair necessarily because what we just went through what happened with Ryan Murray. When you've got a pick in the top 10, especially in the top 5, you've got to hit on it, and it's a huge blow to the franchise if that does
Right.
not happen. So I'm gonna, it's hard to pick on Wright for that. That was in all of these years, that was the highest pick he had to work with, and it
Mm-hmm.
didn't work out. But there's extenuating circumstances outside of the first round. I think for a draft to work out, you need one of these top 12 players. So these are the top 7 forwards on your team, the top 2 lines, third line center, top 4D, and your goalie. Every single year in a draft, I think you have to get one of, if you're going to be a successful amateur scout
Mm-hmm.
running the whole department and you have these 6, 7 picks or whatever you have that year, you need to get one player who can fill one of those roles on your team. And by that standard, the 2012 draft paid off. They got Josh Anderson in the 4th round. And although he's been up and down with injuries throughout his career as well,
Also, yeah.
he when he's healthy, he's definitely a top 6 forward, a power forward. They also got your Eunice Corpusalo.
Yep.
When you look at his record as a goalie, it's kind of up and down. I'm not sold on him as an NHL goalie, but he is a backup in the NHL. So I don't think he meets that standard. But I think that this draft, when you just go look at his record, Bruce, you'll see his save percentage is up and down.
Right.
Um, Josh Anderson, though, I think puts that draft along with Ryan Murray, who I think was a solid choice in the end and has become if he got healthy for the next 5 years, all of a sudden, if he could figure out a way to get healthy, I don't know if he's got like how debilitating his injury history is cumulatively on his career right now. But you could see Ryan Murray helping a team win the Stanley Cup. I could still see that. Like if the Oilers signed him this summer, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
as a stopgap until Philip Broberry's ready. That might not be a terrible move. So I think in this draft, I'm going to give him a pass mark on that first draft.
Okay.
What do you see
Yeah,
in the second?
three NHL players there. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
pretty good. And he just had the normal picks in the one rounds 1 through 7, mind you, at the very top of all those rounds. But getting 3 NHL players is a good draft.
Let's move on to his 2013 draft. What do you
Mm-hmm.
see there? How do you think he did?
Well, two names really jump out. There's actually the top 5 picks all at least got a look in the NHL, but Alexander Wenberg, 14 overall, um, 471 games in the NHL, really coming along as a two-way center. They signed him to a big deal for a number of years, and then his production just fell off the cliff. And only after they moved on from him and sent him to Florida did he bounce back with a good year. And he too, I think, is a guy the Oilers should at least be uh, knocking on his door and having a conversation when free agency season opens. Because boy, that would be an excellent 3C and a guy who could maybe even move up to play 2C at such time as the Oilers decide to put their big guys together. Like they're going to need that kind of player somewhere in the lineup.
Is he still a center? I'm just gonna
Yeah,
check.
as far as I know, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like he did have a pretty good year. You don't want to overpay on a player like that, but if you can get him on a bargain deal, I think I agree. The player that stands out for me, Bruce, in that draft is
Yeah,
I think in the what is it in the 4th round?
yeah.
And no, in the 3rd round, 89th overall, late in the 3rd round, they took Oliver Bjorkstrand.
Hmm.
Oliver Bjorkstrand has become a first line winger in the NHL. His scoring last year, out of 432 regular NHL forwards, like played over 200 minutes this year, he ranks, I think, 50th. Or what was it exactly? I can give the exact number in a second. Anyway, he's like um, uh, 47th out of 432 forwards. So he's become a really top attacking winger, the top attacking winger on the Blue Jackets. So that's 2 drafts in a row. And it's interesting, Bruce, when you look at scouts. The funny thing is they don't get better with age. It seems to me scouts you often have their best years as a scout, their first, second, third years drafting. They
Hmm.
come on, and I think it's just a testament to the hard work it takes to do this scouting. It's a young man's game. It's for super hungry, ambitious people, and they seem to. I think there's a pattern where they seem to do really well early on, and can make a reputation, and then they can tend to fade a little bit.
Like
So,
mathematicians, right? Yeah, if you haven't done your best work by 25, you're probably not going to do it.
and rock stars. Uh,
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, Bjorkstrand. I mean, I watched him play quite a bit with Portland Winterhawks. Always liked him. Was hoping Oilers would draft him that year. Of course, they didn't. And he has it took a while for him to break in, but the last 4 years he's been a regular and he's been regularly around 40 points. And this year he had a career high 44 points in the short season. So
pretty good.
yeah.
So I would say like this is a hit draft. They
Yep.
did have 2 first picks on Kirby Reichel and Marco Dano, which have not worked out,
Right.
and a second pick on Dylan Hetherington, a defenseman that didn't work out. But you hit
Hmm.
on you get a couple forwards like this, especially if Wenberg, I guess it would be Wenberry, goes on to have a good NHL career. The controversial pronunciation of Swedish hockey names, which we're
We're
trying to
still getting feedback on that, eh?
it's one of the funniest things. People have bent over backwards, not bent over backwards, but I think like with Russian hockey names, we now try to get them right. We now try to say them like, it's not Karlamov. We call him Harlamov, right? So
Yep.
everyone knows now how to say Valery Harlamov's name,
Hmm.
and only and many Russian players, but with the Swedish players, that in Sweden, that Berg is Wenberg Broberg. It's Wenberry Broberry. From listening to Swedish hockey games, that's how all the announcers pronounce all these players. It's not Philip Berglund, it's Philip Berglund.
Hmm.
So anyway, it's a minor point, but we're just trying to pronounce the names like they're pronounced in those countries. Um, 2014 draft, he moves on to Detroit, Bruce. He takes over in Detroit. And in
Hmm.
that first year, he's got the 15th overall pick in the 2014 draft, and he takes Dylan Larkin. After that, there's really no hits. In the fourth round, he takes a player called Christopher N, who's had a cup of coffee or two in the NHL, but really hasn't made it and
114 games. I'm surprised. Like,
doesn't look like he's going to be an NHL player at this point, and no one else in that draft year.
right.
So he had one really solid pick, though he had the
Hmm.
15th pick. He did not waste that pick, although Dylan Larson had his probably worst year as a professional this past season. He was in playing through injuries, and he was on a really bad team. And his line mate Tyler Bertuzzi got knocked out after a month of play, and he just had a rancid year. But I think Dylan Larkin, I would consider that to be a really solid pick at 15th overall.
Not quite in the Mike Bossy, Joe Sakic class of number 15 overall picks, but he's not in the Alex Plant, Robert Nilsson, Ryan O'Mara class of number 15 overall picks either. He's a nice player, Dylan Larkin.
Was Matthew Barzell taken 15th overall as well?
16.
16th.
Yeah.
2015 entry draft. And this is so after his fairly strong start, it's going to get let's put it this way. His draft record goes downhill considerably in Detroit to maybe bouncing back in his final year there. This is where this is headed. He drafts with the first pick, 19th overall in 2015 draft. He takes Evgeny Svechnikov, who was rumored to be high on the Oilers board if they hadn't traded that pick, which for Griffin Reinhart. Svechnikov was and Eriksson Ek, Joel Eriksson Ek, I think were the two players rumored to be high on the Oilers board. Svechnikov's career has also been sidelined. He missed a full season because of injury. He finally got into Detroit, though, this year, Bruce. And his points per 60 this year was really strong. It was 1.86 per 60, I think, which is in the top 200 in the NHL for forwards.
Right.
He's a big guy. He's finally healthy again. He didn't play a lot at the NHL level this year, but when he did play, he put up points at a decent rate. So that pick, which looked like it was not working out, mainly because of injury, I'm going to suggest, looks like it may rebound. So that's I'd say there's a question mark. No one else in that draft for Detroit worked out at all. But there's a question mark with the top player, and if he actually panned out and became somehow a top 6 winger in Detroit, which is a possibility still, that you could give him a pass for that draft as well. But right now he doesn't get it.
Right. And of course, when you say top 6 in Detroit, you're not necessarily saying a top 6 NHL winger.
That is a good point, Bruce. That is a good point.
I've been living in Edmonton too long to fall for that one.
The 2016 entry draft, what do you see there for?
Well, Dennis, a couple of players, Dennis Schlofsky and Philip Hronek. And Hronek in the second round, 53 overall, he's come along pretty nicely. He's had 3 seasons in a row. He's a defenseman, 23, 31, 26 points. His plus-minus record is eye-poppingly bad, but again, he's in Detroit, and there's no way to be a regular player. And he's played over 23 minutes a game in each of the last 2 years as a young, developing defenseman. So that draft pick is you'd have to call it a win from what we know to this point. I mean, he's still just 23 years old. And then the other fellow, Dennis Schlofsky, he's been on the cusp of Detroit for a while, and they say nice things about him. Now, this year he only played 16 games. So he's, again, a defenseman. So they got, two guys that they gave a good hard look to in on the blue line. And Hronek for sure, and Schlofsky, I'm not so up to speed on Detroit that maybe he had an injury issue this year or whatever, but he's still working his way in, 22 years old. So
yeah, it's kind of hard to tell because so we look at a player like, let's say, Ethan Bear, Caleb Jones, and players that drafted actually a year previous to that. Right. We might actually, lots of people in Edmonton, for instance, have really positive feelings about Caleb Jones and about Ethan Bear. Right. People in other cities, Bear has made it as an NHLer, but people might look at a player like Caleb Jones from another NHL city and say, oh, well, Why are you excited? Like, was it like there's nothing to
Mhm.
be excited about there? We see a player who could, I think it's fair to say, could be a top four NHL demon. Still could be out of the league though, within 2 years. So it's hard to tell. And Chalowski could be their Caleb Jones, right? Like he
Right.
could be. He did play in the AHL this year, I note, but he had good
Hmm.
points when he played there.
Yeah.
And another guy is Giovanni Smith, who's kind of a big, grinding, physical winger who finally got his break in the NHL this year, and um, he did okay. It looks like on a terrible team, so it's hard to tell. Um, this isn't exactly in terms of making up your mind on Tyler, right? But this draft again could turn out okay. And Philip Hronik is looks like a solid power player and puck mover at the
Hmm.
NHL level. He's obviously in over his head in Detroit in a top pairing role. He should
Hmm.
be, he should probably be a second pairing D man on some team, and he would be probably doing quite well in that role. But they're asking, it looks like they're asking too much of him, and he's cast as the role as the number one D man on the team. So hopefully the Oilers can pick him up in couple of years, just like Montreal picked up Jeff Petrie, and and get a really good player out of that one. Bruce, the next two drafts are where the alarm bells start to go off a little
Hmm.
bit with Tyler Wright, mainly because he had two high picks,
Hmm.
and he used them on forwards. He had the ninth overall pick in 2017 and the sixth overall pick in 2018, and he used them on a gigantic forward out of the Western League, 6'6", 230, Michael Rasmussen. And the next year, he used the sixth overall pick on a high-flying, attacking forward, I think from Czechoslovakia, from Czechia, uh, who Philip Zadina,
Hmm.
who is off, and both of them, Bruce, are down arrows since then. They are not off to auspicious pro debuts. Rasmussen, I think, was rushed to the NHL, not right after he was drafted, but in the year after that, as a 19-year-old. He made his
Yeah.
introduction into the NHL, and he's been
Hmm.
in the AHL,
Hmm.
NHL cuffs player, not really having success. Zadina, um, when you look at his overall boxcar numbers this year, they don't look terrible. But when you look at his points per 60, Bruce, he was one of the lowest scoring attacking forwards in the NHL this year. It
Hmm.
was like 1.06, I think, per 60.
Oh.
So they gave him every opportunity to succeed at the NHL level this year.
Hmm.
And yeah,
Six goals.
1.09 per 60, which is like Kyle Turris level scoring. 361 out of 432 regular NHL forwards. So for a guy with offensive talent, he's not making his mark yet. He's struggling. And that doesn't mean he won't become a good player. And the same with Michael Rasmussen. Like these big guys can suddenly turn it around and become good players. But, forwards, you like them to develop pretty quick, if I'm completely honest. You like to see some real up marks early on. And that usually is an indication of a player who's going to be a top six forward in the NHL. There's exceptions to that, but usually not. And it's not going well so far for either of these players and Detroit. And these were crucial picks to hit on. You need to hit on these picks, and it's pretty iffy if that's going to happen. Joe Velino was taken in the second round in the 2018 draft, and there was a lot of excitement about both with Zadina and Velino.
Hmm.
Um, I recall like people who put a lot of weight in point scoring at the junior level, which is a good thing to put weight on. Definitely.
Hmm.
They were extremely excited by both the Zadina and the Velino picks. Joe Velino he had a decent year with Malmo in the Swedish Hockey League this year, a
Hmm.
point every second game, but maybe not quite what a lot of people were expecting from Velino. But in as a pro player, like maybe hoping for a little bit more out of him as well. The one pick though that might be a huge hit for Detroit in that 2018 draft is a little forward out of Sweden, Jonathan uh,
Berggren.
Berggren. He had
Berggren.
45
My bad.
Berggren, 45 points in 49 games for Skellefteå, Bruce. We saw him play with Philip Broberg,
Hmm.
and he was fast. He's a fast attacking player. He had a breakout season, and that's someone they should be excited about. So let's say Zadina doesn't make it as a top six forward, but Berggren
Right.
does. Suddenly, that draft looks okay. But right now, they had a lot of picks in these drafts,
Yeah, I'll
and
say
I'm not
Detroit
feeling.
in they had 32 picks in 3 years. Detroit. This was after Mike Ilitch died, and Detroit went from being in the playoffs 25 years in a row to flicking the switch and suddenly going for the future. And Ken Holland went from a guy who traded picks for rentals at the deadline to a guy who traded rentals for picks, just like that, basically overnight after Ilitch passed away. And so Detroit kept getting, in this draft, 2018, they had the two firsts with Zadino and Valino, 2 seconds, 3 thirds. I mean, that's a lot of high picks. You better get some players out of that. And so far, I mean, this past season, Zadina, Valino, and Rasmussen combined, they played close to 100 games, and they're all forwards, and they scored a combined 10 goals. So not exactly moving the needle.
Good summation, Bruce. Now, if Berggren does work out, maybe, but
That
you
moves
got to
them.
do. I just think these two drafts aren't looking. They're not trending well for Detroit at this point. Put it
Hmm.
that way,
Right.
at all. And these were Tyler Wright's firmly in control. Okay, here's the good news, Oilers fans. In his final season, and this is complicated because Steve Yzerman comes over
Right.
from Tampa Bay. And I'm just guessing, tucked in his pocket was Tampa Bay's draft list. And so, how much of this was um, Tampa's scouts at work, and how much of this was Detroit's scouts at work, Tyler Wright's work?
Hmm.
But there's lots of up arrows from the 2019 draft, Tyler Wright's final draft in Detroit, including the top pick Moritz Cedar, and a German player who played in Sweden this year and had a really good, strong season in the Swedish Hockey League. Bruce, he
I'll say.
he crushed it over there. And there's a couple other defensemen taken in the second round. Antti Tuomisto, who played with Carter Savoy, an Oilers pick in Denver, and Albert Johansson, who played in Sweden as well in the Swedish Hockey League. Albert Johansson had a really good year as well, and so did Tuomisto, it looks like. So, and then topping that all off in the sixth round, Bruce, they take another, they go the Michael Rasmussen route. They take another gigantic monster forward. This time 6'8", 240-pound Elmer Soderblom
Oh,
from
yeah.
from Frölunda in Sweden. Now he made Frölunda this year, and he played about half the games in the pro for Frölunda as a 19-year-old. But he absolutely crushed it in the World Junior Tournament. I mean,
Oh,
if you watch Sweden, you thought, who's
yeah.
that guy? This
Yeah.
gigantic forward
Mm-hmm.
who
Mm-hmm.
has some skill and can make
Uh-huh.
plays. And you just think, wow.
I was watching that guy and I was going, I remember that guy because he played here in the Hlinka Gretzky under 18 tournament in 2018. And I was very impressed with Soderblom, and I thought he'd be a good candidate for the Oilers. And you'd think that the Oilers might have a few scouts in the stands at a tournament in Rogers Place. But he went all the way down to the sixth round, 159th overall. Absolute steal at that spot because uh, he's not like a speedster, but he is absolutely gigantic, as you say, and he's very smart. He really plays his position well, and as I recall, he's pretty darn good in the face-off circle. I mean, he's got a lot of power, and it's sort of a decent, uh, coordinated guy, just not fast. But I mean, probably faster than he looks because he's so damn big that he doesn't need to take as many strides to cover the ice. And he sure seemed to be in the right place a lot. And sometimes that place was down in the low slot, creating disturbances so that the skilled guys around him, uh, and Sweden had a few of those guys as well, that um, were able to do damage in part because of the work Soderblom was doing away from the puck.
So again, we don't really know, is this a Tyler Wright pick or is this a Steve Yzerman secret draft list
Right.
from Tampa Bay pick? But Wright's in charge of that draft still, so
Mm-hmm.
he's going to get some credit. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that draft, good work, Tyler Wright, on that draft. So overall, we see a fairly strong start,
Mm-hmm.
pretty iffy middle section, pretty
Mm-hmm.
iffy, and then this final draft, which can give some hope.
He's
If
the
Tyler, go ahead.
Alexander Wenberg of the scouting world.
Yeah, so maybe not
What
so.
happens next is the question.
If he was just in charge of the Oilers draft, I'd be a little bit worried, honestly, because again, scouts do their best work, generally speaking, early on, and but he's not alone. He's Bob Green is still the chief scout of the Edmonton Oilers, listed on that's what his job title is. And we look at Bob Green's overall record, Bruce. He took over. He's been a scout on the Oilers. He's been involved in Oilers drafts since the 2014 draft when they took Leon Draisaitl and William Lagesson. They didn't have a lot of other picks. So there was a couple, of course they were the third pick overall with Draisaitl, but they didn't miss. Like they hit on it. They didn't take. Sam Bennett had a pretty good year in the end. Maybe he's going to turn out to be a better player than he was in Calgary. But they didn't miss on the Draisaitl pick. They had a Grand Slam home run pick. And Bob Green was a Western-based scout at that time. So I'm going to suggest he probably had a hand in that. William Lagesson was another pick. Now, we don't know if Bob Green had a hand in it. The next year, just before the draft, Stu McGregor's gone, and Bob Green's in charge of that draft. So we don't know, again, is this Stu McGregor's list? Is this Bob Green's list? But what we do know from the 2015 draft is that in the 4th, 5th, and 6th round, they draft Caleb Jones, Ethan Bear, and John Marino, which is, in terms of making good use of low round picks, these are all of their type. These are either home runs or grand slam home runs, because you're not expecting players at this level to make it as NHL players, and all of them have a really good shot at becoming, I'm going to say Marino and Bear have good shot, and Jones all have a shot at being top 4 D-men in the NHL still. Marino is that already.
He's
in
already
Pittsburgh.
there.
Bear has been one in Edmonton, and Jones has that chance. So,
yeah, and it'd be nice to see what that scouting staff might have done had they retained the numbers 16, 33, 57, 79, and 86 picks, all of which got traded away. For good. They got Cam Talbot out of all that, but they didn't
that's pretty good.
They didn't get near enough for the 16 and 33, of course, and that's a trade that continues to hurt Edmonton to this day. And some people blame Bob Green, by the way, for that trade to get Griffin Reinhart, because the narrative is that Peter Chiarelli asked Green for his recommendation, and Green gave it based on what he'd seen in Edmonton. And what we didn't know was that, what nobody in the Oilers seemed to know, which was pretty damning of their overall scouting and minor pro scouting, was that was it Bridgeport? Islanders had Adam Pelech, Ryan Pulock, Scott Mayfield, all of whom are regular defensemen now on New York Islanders. And the Oilers went and gave in the 2 high picks for Griffin Reinhart. So if you want to pin that on Bob Green, and that's a major black mark on his record, I
think it seems like a fair comment to me, Bruce.
I pin that on the GM. He made the trade. And he did ask for the scouts' advice, and Green was not an American Hockey League scout, and apparently, I'm not sure that they had one from the sound of that, because it sure worked out well for the Islanders.
Yeah, it's kind of a / pro scouting mistake, like pro scouting. Whoever was handling the Oilers with the AHL there, I just hope he's not still with the team, because you just can't. You can't make it's such an unforgiving profession in a lot of ways, right? You can't, if you're going to succeed at this, you can't really, you got to hit, you can't miss. So it's not like, oh, well, we can give you a pass on this and this and this, and it's okay. It's not okay. This is the highest level of hockey. You only have so many chances. They're limited. And if you don't hit on them, it might sound harsh, but you've failed. You've got to hit on most of them. especially these top ones. And when you screw up, it's significant. So it's a tough standard to meet. But
Mhm.
this is the NHL. It's not.
Yeah. Well, no
So
one's
the
going to
next
hit on
draft,
100%,
you
but
don't have to.
you do expect a reasonable batting average.
Yeah,
And as you say, with the high picks, you expect or the return that you get for the high picks if you trade them out, you got to
yeah.
hit on that. Got to.
And this segues to the next draft, 2016, which was looking kind of iffy a year ago,
Hmm.
but it's starting to seem a little different here. I mean, a
Yeah.
year ago, everyone would have said, "Oh, well, Columbus, they're laughing because they took Pierre-Luc Dubois over Jesse Puljujärvi." Well, Jesse Puljujärvi just had a year as good, if not better, than Pierre-Luc Dubois all of a sudden. So maybe this is going to look differently. If Jesse Puljujärvi turns out to the players that we're starting to we think like a top six forward, a strong two-way top six forward in the NHL, then the 2016 draft for the Oilers is a success. If he doesn't, then it's not. Tyler Benson is still kind of in that he might make it, he might not category.
Hmm.
He just had a really good season in the AHL
Yeah,
though.
he did.
And it looks like he's probably gonna, the rumblings, it looks like he's gonna get a chance to make the Oilers
He
this year.
deserves one.
He's gonna be in tough though. There's gonna be other players in that Dominic Cahoon category of winger, I think, available that the Oilers, he's going to have, Tyler Hitmention's going to have to beat out one of those players. He didn't beat out Cahoon this year. He really didn't get that chance because of COVID, I think. And, but he's going to get a shot. And the other pick that looked like a failure for a long time was Markus Niemelainen,
Hmm.
who is kind of going sideways ever since he got picked. But then in Bakersfield this year, he looked good as kind of a shutdown until he got hurt. Until as a gigantic shutdown defenseman at the AHL level. So
Right. And Philip Berryland also out of that list.
yeah,
That's coming over. Had work visa issues this year. He's a big right shot defenseman, same scale as Adam Larson. I think 6'3", 209. And he is, it's a long time coming. 5 years later, that he's just finally coming over the pond. But guess what? 5 years later, he's still only 24 years old. And so, Swedish defenseman, you know, I'm prepared to wait a year or two and see how he does down there in Bakersfield before I write him off.
yeah, he's going to have a full season in Bakersfield. This year was
Sure.
kind of a write off for him. He got hurt,
Right.
and then when he tried to come to Bakersfield, he couldn't get a visa apparently.
Hmm.
So that was tough. So that draft, Bruce, is kind of still a question mark around it, but it's
Yep.
looking at better than it did a year ago from the Oilers' perspective. I can tell you
Hmm.
that because of Puljujärvi. 2017 draft. What do you make of that, Bruce, for the Oilers?
Well, they took a major gamble drafting tiny Kyler Yamamoto in the first round, 22nd overall. I believe he is the lightest at 153 pounds first round pick in history. I think I heard that correctly.
Was
Just
Bobby
just
Lalonde
a
a
little
first round
guy,
pick?
but a fearsome competitor, and it took him a couple of kicks at the can, but he got two tryouts in Edmonton. He got sent back to Seattle for his last year. He got sent back to he got sent down to Bakersfield his first year, his next year, and then finally in his draft plus 3 year, they actually started him in Bakersfield instead of Edmonton and called him up. And since then, he's been a regular. But he had a much better half season last year than he had this year. He took a step back. He played twice as many games, but scored fewer goals and points in the season just passed than he did the year before. And he brings a lot of game, David. I like him as a player, but whether he's a second line or third line right winger, I think that remains to be determined. I see him as he's a gamer. He's a good defensive player. He's got a good, he's got penalty killing type skills. He's got good awareness on the ice. He gets in the lanes and he certainly gets in the battles. So I've got all day for Kyle Yamamoto. But I sure like to see him score more than one goal in 29 games the way he ended the season. So he really fell into it almost seemed like a little bit of a crisis of confidence when he got a scoring chance.
Yeah, he's got to work on his shot. We've talked about this
Yeah.
before. The question we hear about the work Braden Point has put in on his
Mm-hmm.
skating,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. This is what Kailer Yamamoto, if he wants to be a top six winger in the NHL, he's going to have to put in this work in the off season. This off season is crucial for him. He's got to get stronger. He's got to get a
Mm-hmm.
little bit bigger and faster on his skates. He's got to get a better shot. He's
Mm-hmm.
just got to do these things, or he will not be a top six winger in the NHL. It looks
Mm-hmm.
like so. Nonetheless, overall, I'm going to say this draft, which they also took Stuart Skinner, who had a major step up in his play this
Yep.
year. Like his save percentage, he went from a very iffy starting goalie in the AHL the
Mm-hmm.
previous season to a good starting goalie in the AHL
Mm-hmm.
this year, like someone that the team could count on. Even the most exciting pick possibly in this draft was Dmitry Samarukov, taken
Yep.
third overall. And until he had, I think, a separated shoulder that ended his season, some kind of shoulder injury, of course, that ended his season with Seska in Moscow. Bruce, man, he looked good. We both watched him play this
Mm-hmm.
year. He played he had been, his rep had been as an erratic hockey player who could look great one moment. I think Sean Patrick Ryan has referred to him as the good Dima and bad Dima.
Mm-hmm.
And this was just based on this aspect of his game where he would look great and then he would look horrible all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
player we saw in Moscow this year,
Mm-hmm.
he was a metronome, man. He was tick,
Yeah.
tick, tick, get the puck, move the puck, get the puck, move the
Yeah.
puck, stop the other guy, get it, move it. He looked like he could play in the top four in the
Mm-hmm.
NHL one day for a team.
Yeah. Well, he was among the outscoring leaders in the KHL. Uh, as I recall, he was plus 24, and he was on for 38 4 and only 14 against. And this is playing most of the season, playing top 4 minutes. And uh, uh, he was playing the right side, left shot defenseman playing the right side, but with a strong, solid partner, Klaus Dahlbeck, that used to be an
Yeah.
NHLer. And they were a real good, safe pairing. And Samarukov impressed with the simplicity of his game, which was kind of unexpected given his previous track record and what we'd seen and heard, especially heard about the guy. I was expecting a lot more erratic than what we saw in CSKA.
So definite up arrows for
Mm-hmm.
three players from that drafted. I mean, Kailer Yamamoto, from the moment he was drafted with the question marks around him, I would still give him an up arrow. Oh, and I'm going to say Bobby Lalonde, Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's listed at 155 pounds,
There you go.
and the other proviso is he was drafted in the second round, but he was
Oh,
drafted 17th overall.
right. Okay.
So he was drafted higher than Yamamoto, and
Mm-hmm.
he's essentially the same size. So he's the only, I don't know if there's other really tiny guys, but he's certainly
Mm-hmm.
one of them who was, and Bobby Lalonde had kind of he played 641 NHL games,
Oh,
and he had seasons of 20, 17, 17, 24 goals. So,
he
we'll
was a
see.
player.
He was a player in the NHL, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll see if Kailer Yamamoto can be a better player than Bobby Lalonde. But all right, moving on, Bruce. Let's go to the 2018 draft.
Mm-hmm.
This is the draft of Evan Bouchard, Ryan McLeod, Olivier Rodrigue, and Michael Kesselring. So there's some up arrows there as well. It's interesting because the other defensemen drafted around Bouchard that year, who are they? A lot of them have made it in the
Oh,
NHL already.
right.
And so I'll just go down the list. Drafted first overall is Rasmus Dahlin,
Mm-hmm.
who was actually kind of a disappointment in Pittsburgh this year. There's question marks around him now.
Buffalo. Mm-hmm.
But other drafted seventh overall Quinn Hughes, eighth
Yeah.
overall Adam Boqvist by Chicago, and
Yep.
both Hughes and Boqvist have made it in the top four of their teams. Although in Chicago's case, it's not such a massive accomplishment. And then the Oilers had an interesting pick. They could pick Noah Dobson, who's
Mm-hmm.
currently on the power play for the New York Islanders and getting regular minutes there, or they could take Evan Bouchard. So Bouchard, Dobson's already made it. Question marks, I guess, still around Evan Bouchard. But I'd say is still an up arrow with Evan Bouchard. What would you say?
Oh yeah, yeah, and I mean to me, I mean Hughes is in a higher category, um, but Boquist, Bouchard, Dobson, three right shot guys that went 8, 10, 12. Uh, you could have thrown a blanket over the three of them then, and in my mind, you still could. But we've got Boquist with 76 NHL games now, Dobson with 80, Bouchard with 21. And I don't think it's Bouchard not performing. It's just a matter of not necessarily getting the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Oilers had three good right shot defensemen ahead of them this year when those other guys were making their big step into becoming NHL regulars. Bouchard got one crack when Ethan Bear was out for 10 games or so. He played all those games, and that's pretty much all he got. And so what we saw was, just glimpses of a very promising player. And I'm pretty confident that he's going to turn into a good player, but he needs to be given that opportunity to take that next step. They got to write him in pen next year. If it's third pairing, whatever, he's got to be on the ice and playing games. Got
They
to.
cannot, yeah, they cannot block him again. I can see why they did it this year. The Berry thing came up. It's kind of a golden opportunity on a 1 year deal.
Mhm.
Like I don't blame the Oilers for going that route at all and blocking Bouchard this year. Can't happen again. And Ryan McLeod is obviously he just had a tremendous breakout year at the AHL level, where he
Yeah.
was one of the best players in the AHL, one of the best
Hmm.
attackers in the AHL, and aligned with Tyler Benson and Cooper Marody. Big guy who can really skate. There's questions around his game. He looks like he's gonna get a real opportunity though to make it as the third or fourth line center in Edmonton this coming year. And big, fast, great with the puck. If he can play solid defensive hockey, and again, he doesn't have to be big Bobby Clobber out there. He just has to cover the man well in the defensive slot. And if he can do that, make the right reads down there in the D zone, the Oilers have it looks like they have a player here.
Yeah, his scoring sure came along in the AHL, and he was the plus minus leader in that entire league this year, even though he missed the last uh, several weeks of the season when he finally got called up. Now in Edmonton, he came in, he played 10 games and all the playoff games. He didn't score, like I think, at 1 point. And it was a puck that went off his skate to another Oiler that they put in. So there was really nothing that uh, showed up in his scoring. But I mean, we have to remember this is a guy that in his first year in the AHL, he only scored 5 goals. And in the second year, he was good.
Yeah.
And so he may be one of those guys that just, give him a little bit of time before you judge him entirely, but some of the things that we see that we can judge are the speed and the size and the skill. And I wish he had a tad more aggressiveness, a little more grit to his game, frankly. Uh, uh, and maybe that's something that will come. Sometimes these young guys learn. You just got to do that. You just got to get your nose dirty, and eventually they get comfortable with it. But we don't know if that's in his future or not. It sure would be something that even if it doesn't become sort of a plus thing, he has to turn it into at least a sort of neutral thing.
Yeah, there was too many times I just have this when you mention that lack of grit in his game, suddenly this image of him charging in there on the forecheck and not finishing his check
Right.
just came to mind, and I had a really down feeling about the player all of a sudden. Because how many times did we see that in the playoffs? We saw it. There's just a number of times where it's almost mystifying that he didn't finish his check.
Well,
You
he
know,
has
a young guy who's going to be the checking center on the Oilers next year. Now, again, you don't have to be the guy who drills other players through the boards to be a good
right.
checking center in the NHL. The most important thing, like Gaetan Haas wasn't that guy, but Gaetan Haas engaged physically. And if he had only been a little bit bigger, he'd be coming back next year. Now, if Ryan McLeod can read the game at a high enough level to make the right reads in the defensive zone, he can play in the NHL, and he doesn't have to become this huge physical player. He's got to do that, but it would help him if he did play a bit more physical game. I agree with you, Bruce. The other player with an up arrow I'm going to say is Michael Kesselring,
Hmm.
who is a great big defenseman, 6'4", 220, and went to U.S. college hockey and had a couple good years, and came. as things went along in Bakersfield, there was an injury. Lundstrom got hurt, and he got a chance in the final two playoff games, and he played well. So a big guy who can skate and make plays. He's another player who's got perhaps a pro future, a right shot defenseman to boot. So out of this draft, there's some real potential as well. 2019 draft, Bruce. Philip Broberry, Raphael Lavoie, Ilya Konovalov, and Matej Blumel. All players, again, who are, it's really early in all of their careers. And there's controversy around the Broberry pick because other people, Cole Caulfield was, people hoped the Oilers would take Cole Caulfield or Trevor Zegras, who have both made the NHL already, and Caulfield's doing well in the playoffs now for Montreal. So there's some controversy around this draft, but there's also some really good signs from this draft as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's I mean, Broberry is, he's a gamble on future development. I mean, the raw skills were there from the beginning. He's another player that played in that Hlinka Gretzky tournament here in 2018, and he grabbed everybody's eye right away with his combination of size and speed. Like he could just pick up the puck in his own zone and just ramble up the ice with it, and hit the blue line with speed and create some chaos. Like he wasn't like an obvious finisher, but he sure was a guy that could push the play in the right direction and push it that way hard. And lots of very raw, lots of rough edges, but very promising. And obviously Ken Holland and the scouting staff saw the promise in that player, and they missed Soderblom is another question, but they got that player, and they obviously they prioritized him at number 8 overall, which was a little higher than he was on in many rankings. As you say, with Zegras and Caulfield still on the board, that's one that those are two players that people are going to be looking at and seeing. Of course, they're forwards. It's not an easy comparison, but it will be an easy comparison if Broberry doesn't make the NHL, because it's clear that both Zegras and Caulfield are going to be top 6 forwards for quite a few years to come.
So he had a weird year, Philip Broberry in Sweden. He I'd say for the first half, till he got hurt at the World Junior Tournament, I really liked what I saw in this player. He was up and down. He was inconsistent, but when he was up, was he ever up? He is a great big defenseman. He's listed at Hockey DB 6'3", 203. I wouldn't be surprised if he's an inch taller and 10 pounds or 20 pounds heavier than that, at least by the time he gets to the NHL. He's big, and can he ever wheel? Like he reminded me like that combination of like just in terms of tools, not in terms of performance.
Right.
Like Serge Savard, this great big guy who can wheel around the ice and is good with the puck. Now he's a long way from the performance of Serge Savard, a long way. But that's the tools. That's what we're talking. That's what the scouts are seeing, and the performance was starting to come too. When the confidence was high and he was wheeling with the puck in games, like he would either go from being shy with the puck and not making plays to actually having a lot of confidence and it seemed to waver in games. Now in the second half of the season, I didn't see him as much. And he started to when I did, he was making a lot of defensive mistakes, and that was the word out of Sweden. He was not taking the man consistently, giving too much gap, turning over the puck, and by the end he wasn't playing a lot either. So he didn't finish with a lot of confidence. But so it's hard to know, but I'm not down on this pick. I think there's, on the small ice in North America, someone that big and that fast. If they can get him thinking the game, making the right calls, like I think he's going to be in the AHL this coming season. He should be in the AHL, but have him work with Manson down there. Dave Manson, who's I think an excellent coach from the results we're seeing. Get him working with Dave Manson, and we'll see how this player turns out. People who are down on this player, I'm just going to say I suggest have some patience here, because the toolkit is immense and it's outstanding, even if the performance doesn't yet match that.
Yeah, well, the red flag for him is that at the beginning of his second year in the top Swedish league, he started on the top pairing and he was getting like 20 minutes a night. And by the end of the season in the playoffs, he was the seventh defenseman on the same team. So
Correct.
his ice time just crashed.
Yeah.
And uh, I mean, the injuries probably had something to do with it, although they claimed he was, healthy enough to be playing a couple of weeks after the World Juniors, but he did never seem to recover the form that he had in the early season. And this is a top 10 draft choice in his draft plus 2 year season. Moritz Seider, the German fellow that Detroit drafted sixth overall in the same draft, he won the SHL Defenseman of the Year. That's
Yeah.
hard to do for a non-Swede. Swedish defensemen typically win that award, I would imagine. With all the great Swedish defensemen we have, well, Moritz Seider, like he clearly is, trending very well indeed. And
Yes.
Broberry's trending is a little alarming, and certainly at best you can say muddled. He's not sort of clearly trending up.
That is a fair comment, Bruce. That is a fair comment. Did they trade for a defenseman? Yeah, like
They brought
his
someone in, yeah. It wasn't the
Oscar
same group
Nielsen. I don't
all year.
remember. Yeah. So yeah, fair comment. This may turn out to be a mess.
Hmm.
This pick, there's no other way to put it. But I'm going to say let's be patient and let's
Yeah.
get him over to North America. Let's see how he does. Plenty to like. Raphael Lavoie,
Hmm.
great year in the second division in Sweden.
Hmm.
On a very bad team, he was the best player.
Hmm.
Rough, tough, gets the puck, go to the net. I just love that about him actually in those games. What I saw in that aspect, he went to the AHL for the final bit of the year
Hmm.
and kind of had up and down results. He
Yeah.
point every second game. So
Well,
another
he
great big
he would
guy.
have a point a game for 5 games and then nothing for 5 games, as
Yeah,
opposed to
that's how it worked.
he was, yeah, plateau high, plateau low. It seemed to be his trend. So,
So I'm going to give him an up arrow since the draft,
hmm.
though, because what I saw in Sweden in that second division was a player who loved to take the puck hard to the opposition net and has a really good shot and a mean streak. So these are all highly NHL translatable skills,
Hmm.
and the Oilers could use a sniper and a shooter on the wing.
Hmm. Yeah,
He could be the guy. He's going to be in the AHL next year as well.
yeah,
Ilya
right.
Konovalov, he's a Russian goalie, a smaller goalie, but and he didn't have as good a year as the season he had before in the KHL, but he's now signed a AHL contract, um, and
NHL contract
and she's
with an
yeah,
AHL
so,
component.
yeah, yeah. So his save percentage this past year, Bruce, was 923.
It's pretty good.
The KHL has really high save
Ridiculous.
percentages.
Yeah.
So this is probably about average in the KHL. It was actually an improvement over his 2019-20 season when he was at 912 save percentage. But he looks like a solid pick at that level in the draft. Third round pick, 85th overall. If you can get an NHL goalie out of that, that's pretty good. And the next pick is
He
actually
was a 20-year-old when they drafted him, but he was a 20-year-old who just had an exceptional year in the KHL, I believe 930. And
yeah.
he won a bunch of rookie awards. And uh, and then he wound up this year. He somehow got beaten out by Eddie Pasquale, a former Bakersfield Condors goalie who got hot and won the number one job. And I think Konovalov was out of favor because he wasn't going to sign another contract there, and so they just kind of buried him. But he's a promising young goalie. They always have a few of them, and the challenge will be to find playing time for them all.
I wonder if that didn't happen to Broberry at the end of the year, where his play dropped off, but also he's not coming back and they know it, right?
Yeah,
And they have other players that are. So at some point you just think, unless you're really killing it, like Moritz Cedar, like he wasn't
yeah.
going to get benched, obviously. But
Right.
Broberry wasn't in that category. But
Hmm.
maybe he got a little less playing time also because okay, well you're going to be moving on here, so we're going to be moving on right now. I don't know if that happened. I'm just speculating,
Right.
but it's a possibility. The Oilers, I think what did Matej Blumel get? He was the fourth round, 100th overall pick.
Hmm.
So again, we're getting in the category of players who are not at all likely to be NHL regulars when they're drafted. This is a really iffy part of the draft. What is it? Maybe 1 in 20 guys at this stage in the draft become
How do you
NHL. Regulars 1-30. It's not
Uh,
high. Yeah, 1-20. I think one
I'd
in,
say 1 in 10, but it's not high, but it's
yeah.
still
So,
good.
but
And
anyway,
I guess it depends how you define
a
NHL
regular.
player.
Yeah,
But
like top six winger. It's
oh,
definitely,
yeah,
yeah, it's
wouldn't be
definitely
that
one
high.
in 1-50 probably. Anyway, he had a great year, really, really good
Hmm.
year in the Czech league.
Hmm.
He is a Czech hockey player, and 17 goals in 49 games. From the highlight clips that I saw of him, he's a one shot shooter again. He's a sniper. So they've drafted three guys in the last two drafts: Blumel, Lavoie, and Carter Savoy, who are one
Right.
shot scorers. That's their primary skill. And is that ever a good idea, Bruce, to draft that kind of player if you're the Edmonton Oilers right now?
Hmm.
Because that's what you're missing. Now you can say, well, Cole Caulfield's that guy. Yeah, he was. So that hurts. That hurts a little
Hmm.
bit. Starting to hurt. But they've got three guys. And Maximov, Kirill Maximov, who we didn't mention, is also in that category of a one-shot shooter. He
Right.
never really showed that at the AHL when he was there. That in his one full season there. They've got some promising guys here, and Blumel's one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So is Maxim Denishkin, the last pick of that 2019 draft. Saw some good video of him from Russia. Still a kid, of course. I mean, we're talking about 2019. So, you're talking about a guy who's just looking up his birthday. Yeah, he turned 20 during the season. Just 5'10", 165 pounds. So that's a strike against him being an NHL player. But it's certainly possible to succeed at that size. But you have to be, exceedingly good to do that. But he sure has some good hockey smarts and made some great passes where great vision that he showed to my eye that he found some guy in the open that wound up with a fairly easy shot. So
So this was Bob Green's last year as the director of player personnel, or like the guy in charge of the draft.
mhm.
I'm not exactly sure of his title, but the guy in charge of the draft last year, where he's alone the top guy. Ken Holland is already in place there, and in Ken Holland's pocket, for all we
Mhm.
know, is Detroit's draft list, which
Right,
Tyler Wright would have put together.
right.
So we don't like the top pick with Broberry. We don't know what influence the Detroit draft
Mhm.
list had on Edmonton's pick, but so that's something to keep in mind in terms of rating Bob Green. So this last draft, the 2020 draft, we know that both Wright and Green are key players for the Oilers. So, I'm going to it could almost be 51-49 in terms of who's responsible for it, maybe, or maybe 60-40 with Wright being the 60. But they have both these guys. And I'm going to say Bob Green. I've liked Bob Green's drafts. I think
Mhm.
there's really interesting players every year. And every year
Mhm.
there's guys that look like they can make it still. So I overall, other than that Griffin Reinhart thing that you brought up, which is kind of major gaping wound in his record, I like what Bob Green has done. And this last draft, the 2020 draft, and it's funny. Like drafts always look best, maybe the moment of the
Mhm.
draft, and then they start looking, But the
Mhm.
2020 draft looks better. I'm going to say significantly better right now than the moment it happened.
Right.
The Dylan Holloway was the first pick, 14th overall. He just had a fantastic season in American college hockey, and
Yep.
he's a big, fast, and aggressive center with some skill. Bruce, it looks like they may have hit a home run with that pick, maybe a grand slam home run. But it's not just Dylan Holloway in that draft.
Right.
There's other picks. There's Carter Savoy taken 100th overall. He was one of the top scoring. He was a top scoring forward on his team, I think, at Denver. Let
Mhm.
me just confirm that. And he was a absolute sniping gem at the NCAA level this year.
Mhm.
Tyler Tullio, 126 overall. He went over to play in Slovakia because there was no OHL. That's how he had the
Right.
pulled the strings there, and he played well in this Slovakian top pro league. Maxim Berezhkin, um, fifth fifth round, 138th overall. He had a good year playing in the
Huge
second.
guy.
Huge guy. I think, did he make their World Junior team? I think he did.
I don't
Did
think
he?
so, but he played some games in the KHL.
Yeah.
And and again, he and Daneshkin, who's rhymes, Denezhkin. They played on the same line is it the VHL? It's one of the developmental leagues there. Yeah.
And the last pick, Jeremias Lindevall, Bruce, has just been named as one of the candidates for the Swedish World Junior team this coming year. He was taken 200th overall.
Wow.
And so that's not bad that you get on the 200th pick. You get a player who looks like they might make the Swedish World Junior team.
Yeah.
What do you think of this draft?
Yeah. Well, way too early to judge, but there's up arrows. I mean, Holloway and Savoy both definitely had up arrows. Both of them were big-time scorers in the AJHL. And Holloway had kind of a not highly productive freshman season in NC2A, and that's when he got drafted, was after that. And then this year he just ripped it up. He went from 0.5 to 1.5 points per game in NC2A. And Savoy scored 53 goals in the AJHL last year. I think he was the highest scoring player in that league for a couple of decades. And he went right into college and he started scoring right off the bat. I think he tailed off a little bit, but he still had, very good totals for the season for a freshman. And he's a real sniper, first shot scorer, as you say. Gets into good spots and not shy about letting her rip when he has a opportunity to do so.
He's got all kinds of skill, and he had just a great year. He was the top goal scorer on his team, just a few points back of the top point getter on his team. He's going to play one more year, obviously, of college hockey, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes pro after that. Right. He could even go pro this coming year. You never know, but I think it would probably be advisable for him to play one more year. So Bruce, overall, I'm going to say Bob Green has a pretty good record so far drafting, and Tyler Wright has more of a checkered record. Together, maybe they can get it right. I guess the what you'd like to see in a scouting department, an amateur, is fresh people coming in. Because you do often see that burst when someone comes on. Typically, you see it. So even though Bob Green's done well, maybe he's done doing well. That's not unheard of with even the best amateur scouts. So that's the one thing I would think is that, they're both been around doing this a long time. Scouts don't tend to get better with more experience. So maybe move them to the pro ranks. Maybe boost the pro, have them do the AHL, have them do pro scouting now, both of those guys. Focus on that, or at least bring in someone new to help out at the amateur level. That might be a move that the Oilers would consider.
Yeah. Well, what would be proof in the pudding for me is to see somebody from a little lower down in the draft really hit it out of the park and move up the charts quickly without having, the Oilers have had, Ryan McLeod, second round pick. He's got a chance to be that guy where he's arriving ahead of schedule, as in his second pro year. So he still has one full year on his ELC. If he plays that whole year in Edmonton, then he's ahead of schedule. But I look at these draft lists and I see the guy, and the first draft choice has a bunch of games played, and all the guys below him are like single digits or nothing at all, year after year. And I've been beating on this drum for a long time that the Oilers don't have enough success in the Saturday portion of the NHL draft to bring up, not even necessarily stars, but support players, role players, who are, Oilers, because they've come up through the system. It's the team they know, it's the team they love, and you look at the good teams in the playoffs and you find those kind of guys. I named those 3 Islanders defensemen. I could probably name you about 8 guys from the Tampa Bay Lightning like that are, playing key roles on the team now that, were lower draft picks, and almost any successful team you can look at, you can say, well, look at that, third line center and that fourth line winger and that second defenseman, second pairing defenseman that nobody thought much of, but here he is in the NHL killing it. And there's, I mean, Ethan Bear, he might be one of those players. He's promising in that regard. And otherwise, I mean, Jujhar Khaira has been the one and only for years, he's up to 250 NHL games now. And I'd say even at this point, 9 years on from his draft, you can't really say he's killing it, but you can say at least they got an NHL player, a role player out of it. That's, a worthwhile player, but they haven't had near enough of that kind of success in the Saturday portion of the draft.
Yeah, so we've talked about those 12 key players on every NHL team.
Mm-hmm.
The players that for this coming season who might step into the 12. So Evan Bouchard, really good chance, but he's a top pick. You'd expect that, right? Puljujarvi, same thing. Yamamoto, same thing. So it's not
first round
what
pick.
The Oilers do need is they need McLeod to be the third line center to step up, or Dmitry Samorukov to be the second pairing left D. And if he had played a full year in Moscow, didn't get hurt, and we saw if that was more fresh in our heads than if we had seen that all year, that is not a stretch. This is a very good hockey player, and he's big, and he's got pro experience now. 2 years of one in the AHL where he was okay-ish maybe, but one in the KHL where he kind of crushed it. Samorukov it's not crazy talk to think about him as earning an NHL job next season. Certainly as a third pairing demon, that would make a lot of sense actually. And should be, they shouldn't block him necessarily, like with Chris Russell or.
Well, I guess the question is if Evan Bouchard winds up on the third pairing, which is very possible as a first year as a full timer, whether they'd want to put him with another youngster or maybe they would want to put him with a stabilizing influence.
Yeah.
So, there's more than one way to play it, but certainly one of the guys on the third pairing needs to be a young up and comer. And I mean, this year that was Ethan Bear that played a lot of time on the third pairing, and I think he's one guy that will step into the top four next year, and has at times in the past.
So, like you say, though, they also need that. They also for a forward to succeed in the NHL. If the Oilers are going to make a move in the NHL rather than stumble, they need that Brendan Gallagher pick. They need that Braden Point pick. They need that forward pick. That guy who becomes a first, or at least first line would be great. Second line would even be good. Like someone who steps up into that role. So there's a number of candidates. I think there's a number there's Blumel, there's Savoy, there's Lavoie, there's Tullio, there's Brezhkin. There's all of these players in the last 2 years who have been taken that high. One of these guys needs to make a move this coming year and really scream. I'm that guy. I'm him. And I'm that player. We're not seeing someone screaming that, but we're seeing a lot of up arrows for the first time in a long time in terms of a scoring winger who might step up. So and Holloway has also he was a first overall pick. So again, you're expecting a little bit more, but Holloway made that move, Bruce. Like if he had been taken later in the draft, he would be that guy.
Right.
Doesn't matter. I'm not going to hold his draft order. If he can be that guy who steps up into a top six role this year on the Oilers, it's not a bad bet either. Then the Oilers, that's a huge thing for the Oilers organization. If they can get one or two more of these guys stepping up in these roles, the Oilers are set. But they need it to happen. They need one of these players to come through, Bruce.
Well, as I just wrote in my post, I mean, if you do the core 12, the Rich Winter template of 7 forwards, including the 3C, 4D, and 1 goalie, and the one version, and you could argue who belongs on that list and who doesn't in a couple of spots. But my version of the list, 8 of the 12 are free agents. And 5 of them are unrestricted free agents. Those guys are not coming back, so they're going to need to replace them. And hopefully you don't replace them only by free agent signings, which tend to be overpriced. I mean, you got to get some upward mobility from some of these draft picks, and uh, both McLeod and Holloway certainly are promising and have very promising seasons just past. That maybe that's their version of shouting, "I'm the guy. I'm the NHL caliber
Yeah.
player, and I'm on my
Yes.
way." So let's hope it's
They
high
they
time.
they're certainly doing the old what's his name Horshack.
Hmm.
Me.
Hmm.
Remember Welcome Back, Cotter. Uh, they've raised their hand high in the air and to get the organization's attention. And it's not crazy to think that they could move into the Big 12 on the Oilers this coming year. And it would
Hmm.
be if they succeed in those roles that oh, nothing better than that. And if Samorukov also did the same,
Hmm.
that would be massive
Right.
for the franchise. Now there's Tyler Benson who's got a chance to do that. It's less
Hmm.
likely. And then there's these other guys with I think that you leave Savoy even though he had this fantastic year scoring. Uh, do you want to sign him to a pro contract right now? I don't know.
Oh no, not until next March at the earliest, after next college season, and there's still time for him to come and get his feet wet in the pros. I mean, ideally you want to groom him to be an NHL player, and if you were to turn him pro now, there's still zero chance he plays in the NHL next season. I just can't see it.
And you have a lot of players who are going to be like Raphael Lavoie is going to be in the HL. He's
Hmm.
going to be in a feature role. You don't want
Good.
Lavoie blocking Savoy. You don't want
Hmm.
you hopefully Raphael Lavoie has a big year in the HL next season where he's on the top line and on the top power play and he's producing there and
Right.
then he makes his move to the NHL the year after. So then Carter Savoy takes his place, and maybe he's on his wing as Matej Blumel and Tyler Tullio, and they're all one of those guys is then that guy at the AHL level, and then he advances to the NHL year after that. Doesn't take long for wingers. It shouldn't take long, and I don't. I wish Benson had got more of a chance, honestly, this year at the AHL level, so we know a little bit more about whether he can get it done. But so overall, Bruce, I just think heading into the draft, this isn't. It's a. It looks like they have an okay team um, of people making the decisions based on the last few drafts. So I'm not. This isn't. I think there's major question marks around pro scouting. There's less. This not. There's far fewer question marks around the amateur scouting that's what the Oilers have right now.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they had more than two picks in the top 150, though. 160. They got two picks in the first 5 rounds.
Well, there's that. There's that.
So
Looks like
and
they're.
the Oilers have been they had 5 picks in 2018, six in 2019, six in 2020. This year, unless there's a change, they have five, and next year even they only have six. So unless they start somehow acquiring draft picks by some method, they're going to be short the full complement of 7 draft picks 5 years in a row. So that's kind of counterproductive to building a prospect system.
Yeah, I guess they could try to trade somebody. I don't know who they're going to trade
Hmm.
because they're
Well,
not
with all
exactly
these
stacked.
UFAs, they can't trade UFAs for draft picks. There are very rare exceptions where a team wants to negotiate with a guy, but that won't be happening this year with the Seattle draft anyway, I don't think.
When you look at all of these players, we've just talked about a pretty long list of guys who are kind
Hmm.
of pretty promising. It's Holland in the first couple of years made a ton of bets on kind of, Gaetan Haas, Joachim Nygaard. I don't think they shouldn't go that route this year. They shouldn't block players with those. I think they needed to do that with, the Yurchos of the world and
Hmm.
Granlund and Devon Shore, these kinds of players. Don't That doesn't seem like the best idea anymore when we haven't mentioned Cooper Marody, but you have
Right.
Marody, you have Benson, you have Raphael Lavoie. You've got a number of players, McLeod, Holloway. Let's leave the door open for these guys to step. One of these guys, the
Right.
best of them, or the best two of those guys to step in
Hmm.
and grab a job this coming season.
Hmm.
And and
Or maybe error on the
Samorukov,
side,
same deal. Go ahead, sorry.
error on the side of giving a 22-year-old a shot over a 27-year-old, even if the 27-year-old is this much better right now, you
Yeah.
know. rather than bury Tyler Benson, for 3 years running. You know, give a guy like that, at least a sliver of a chance to develop, within the NHL. And like you could argue that all of these layers that Holland has built up of guys that they have to beat out, there's just too many layers for these young guys, and especially with a coach who likes his veterans. And the Oilers have very few guys on their teams these last years that were on entry level contracts. Well, you want to beat the salary cap. One way to do it is to have a couple of impact guys that are on ELCs. So they have an upper limit on what they're getting paid, or what the cap hit is, more to the point, and it can make big contributions. And the Oilers have had precious few of those, and none that weren't sort of drafted very high in the first round.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do on lefty. It's what a chaotic situation. Still not knowing what's happening with Oscar Klefbom, right? Because
Oh man.
so they have Darnell Nurse, right? So
Hmm.
you have Darnell Nurse,
Yep.
and if you had Klefbom, then the
You
easy
bet.
thing to do would be to say, and you have Chris Russell. Then the easy thing we're going to leave a spot open for either Broberry or Samorukov,
Right.
and we got these two horses.
Mm-hmm.
As it is now, though, that makes it's harder to bet on youth in a way
Mm-hmm.
when you don't know what's going to happen with Klefbom.
Right.
And you have Slater Cuckoo sitting there. You got Chris Russell signed. You have Nurse, and the huge temptation,
Like,
and you got Lagesson sitting there. The huge temptation will be to bring in another veteran, and which will freeze Samorukov out essentially. And you have Caleb Jones, right? You have
mm-hmm.
all of these
Yep.
players.
Yep.
So the temptation is going to bring in one more veteran guy, which is going to totally block Samorukov's development
Mm-hmm.
because he's not beating out Lagesson and Jones and Russell. There's just no spot for him.
Right.
There's only a spot for him if you don't bring in one more player. But with Klefbom's situation, they almost have to bring him in. So it means Samorukov will play another year in the AHL, which isn't, it'll be his third year as a pro. He's still he can get through waivers, slide through waivers, and you'll know a lot more about him at the NHL level after one more season in the AHL. So it's not a tragedy. It's just he's blocked right now. Maybe it's okay. Maybe I guess I'm not necessarily against that. Wish we knew what was going to happen with Klefbom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't everybody?
Yeah. My best guess is that the Oilers don't protect him in the expansion draft, and that Seattle doesn't pick him in the expansion draft, and then we're going to find out. But every reason to think he's going to spend some to a lot of time on LTIR next season, because he had the surgery relatively late, and apparently it's a very complicated recovery. So such terrible luck. To lose a player of that caliber to such an extended period. And it's not like, he's had Tommy John surgery and we can say with confidence that start of next training camp he'll be fine. No, he's had this kind of surgery that's got plenty of risk and unknown outcomes.
Twice in a row, Sekera, they've lost their top lefty. Sekera, boom, out. Klefbom, boom, out. And this has had a huge impact on the Oilers. Certainly 2017, 18, and 2018, 19, having Klefbom playing hurt and and Sekera not playing or playing hurt. It was just really hammered the franchise. Losing that player. Now Nurse has stepped up. They've got the number one D man, knock on wood, in terms of the injury situation. But they got to fill in around that. So we'll see what happens. And they've got, so obviously there's lots of options now boiling up though. And I like what Ken Holland, I think he indicated that they're looking to build from within right now. This is the right strategy when you have all of these talented young players accumulated in the draft that are up arrows since the draft on Bob Green's watch. Let's see how some of them turn out. I've got a good feeling, Bruce, that we're going to get some good news with two or three of them breaking through on the Oilers this coming season.
Good. Sure hope so.
Yes.
They need it, and they need to have some cheap players who can help. They have to upgrade their bottom six, and they have to upgrade it. Getting mediocre 27-year-olds. I'm not sure that's really the solution. Not when they're getting outscored to the degree that they have been in their bottom six. And it would be nice to, instead of having to spend, it'd be nice to be able to bring in a real first class player at one of the positions that they need help, like scoring winger, for example. Sure,
Yeah,
it'd be nice to have one of those. I mean, they had
sure would.
Taylor Hall, they had Jordan Eberle, they had Patrick Maroon, they traded them all away, and they brought back no scoring wingers.
Yeah.
You know,
I wonder if Zach Hyman, he's mentioned a lot right now as a possibility for the Oilers. I think it's actually not out of the question the Oilers could sign that player. Wonder if he could be that player for Connor McDavid, the Kunitz, the
yeah,
Kunitz kind of winger, two-way winger, smart two-way winger that worked so well with Sidney Crosby for years in
hmm
Pittsburgh. That would be fantastic if that was to work out. And I can't say if Zach Hyman's that player. I haven't watched him play.
right,
The other thing they can do with some of these prospects, Bruce, they need a third line center. Like I think if you're
yeah,
counting on Ryan McLeod, I think as 4C, that's a really good idea. As 3C, that's not a good idea. Bob Stauffer on the Oilers now has been talking about trading for that for 3C yesterday. He was talking about that. You could use Samorukov. You could use Tyler Benson. You could use one of these players. Probably not Benson. His value is not there. But you could use, I think Samorukov has value if you're paying attention. And you could use that player then to trade for the 3C that could help the Oilers. So that's a possibility as well. Or you could use Caleb Jones.
or you could sign Alexander Wenberg as a free agent and
I
play,
don't, I
through
can't, I'm not, I don't
player.
I don't, yeah, you could do that. I can't, personally, I can't, I don't know. I have never, I have no idea of his game. Like he had some good, decent scoring numbers. I think he was 200th about out of 430 NHL forwards. So pretty good even strength scoring. I don't know if he's the answer at 3C or not. So I'm not going to, could be like it could be, but I can't vouch for him. But, and he is a free agent, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, you don't trade
So,
anything for the guy. That's the thing. So,
yeah. So there's lots of players though. I use the example I like is Mason Appleton because I've looked at a lot of the mock expansion drafts for Seattle,
mhm.
and they have Mason Appleton going to Seattle. Well, if Winnipeg needs a defenseman or two, why don't you package up? Why don't you trade Dmitry Samorukov and Caleb Jones for Mason Appleton?
Mhm.
Would Winnipeg go for that? Maybe. And I don't see why not if they're going to lose him. And then either one of those guys Samarukov's not even eligible for the expansion draft. So
Right.
the Winnipeg then gets what they need and the Oilers get what they need. So
Yeah,
I hope the Oilers make one or two deals like that where they're filling in these holes at
yeah.
forward with defensemen
You
moving
need
up.
to find a lopsided team that's got 8 or 9 forwards they'd like to protect and only a couple of defensemen. And I'm
They're
not sure
there.
that's not the Jets.
Yeah, there's teams
Their
like that.
defense is not that
Yeah,
deep anymore. And, they'll be protecting, Morrissey, for example, will be protected. But if you look down that list, and Forbort's a free agent and Pionk, I mean, they got obviously those two. But maybe
Pionk
the
and
third
Demelli.
one, they say, well, we can maybe upgrade by going out and getting a young player, but we got too many forwards, so we need to trade a forward for a D-man. And Edmonton's saying we need to trade a D-man for a forward. They got to find a fit like that somewhere before that expansion draft, and maybe that's one way to fill a hole.
Or two. Yeah. If they can fill one hole, like with a player like Mason Appleton, who I quite liked during the playoffs, I
Hmm.
did watch
Oh,
him,
yeah, he's a good player.
and he's on all these lists. So find the best. Go look at all. Just try to figure it out. Like you can go through all the teams yourself and make your own list of who
Right.
Seattle's going to take. You can try to figure that out. But a lot of people are creating these lists, so there's going to be 5 or 6 forwards are on all these lists. Target one
Hmm.
of those guys. Like
Right.
there are 5 or 6 really good forwards right
Hmm.
now, and look at that's what the Oilers' strategy
Right.
should be. I'm assuming it is. That's I don't. Ken Holland is not. He's not a
Yeah.
dummy.
Yeah.
That's their strategy.
Yeah.
If you and I can think of this, they're
Right.
thinking of this.
You just need those pesky pro scouts to pick the right guy, right?
Indeed, Bruce. Indeed, they got to get it right. They
Yeah.
do. So,
Yeah. Got to.
well, I think we've covered this fairly comprehensively.
Indeed. Only 2 words that didn't make that podcast. Philip Kemp, who's a late round pick in that 2017 draft where they got quite a few sort of nice prospects in the lower round, some of whom are developing better than others, but they do have um, uh, they do have bodies in the system, I guess, and it's just a matter of one of them's got to turn out. So, and,
Yeah, my last cautionary tale on this whole thing.
mhm,
Whenever you're talking about draft picks, it's hard to know. And I just remember after the 2010 draft. So the 2010 draft, they take Taylor Hall first, then they take Tyler Pitlick, Martin Marincin, Curtis Hamilton, Ryan Martindale, Jeremy Blaine, Tyler Bunz, Brandon Davidson. And there was tremendous, and I shared it, there was tremendous excitement in Edmonton about the possibility of that draft and what it would mean for the Oilers.
mhm,
And they had 3 second-round picks. They used it on Pitlick, Marincin, and Hamilton. And the fact is that in terms of filling one of those, those Big 12 roles on an NHL team,
mhm,
only one guy, Taylor Hall, first
right,
overall, did it.
right.
None of the other ones. Marincin just signed in Europe. Tyler Pitlick has bounced around, and he's kind of bounced around as a bottom line player.
Mhm,
And so there can be, like, as much as I'm excited about the last few
right.
drafts, I completely understand that early excitement, even if there's up arrows, and there was up arrows with
Mhm.
that draft as well for a lot of those players, it doesn't mean squat until they make it.
Lots of bigger guys, older, late birthday type guys in 2010. And for all that Oilers had this Western Canadian network scouring the province of BC in particular, somehow in 2010 they missed Brendan Gallagher, who went to Montreal 147th overall. And you just kind of wonder, after having a great season with Vancouver Giants, and you kind of wonder, how the heck did they miss that guy? But is it because he was 5'9", or is it, I mean, there was no way to miss the guy when he played. I saw him play as a junior, and he just stood out always. He's always stood out. But that was one that's one where I think Edmonton scouts, based the way they were, that was a miss. That
Oh
was a
god.
good player that they
Yes.
could have, and almost. I mean, there's 30 teams. You can't say, well, they should have had him, but geez, if he went to number 147, they missed him. So,
Well, they needed to draft
and
Tyler Bunz.
that's a core 12 player.
Yeah.
They need to
That's a
draft
good
Ryan Martindale and Jeremy Blaine.
I like that core 12. That's a good way to
Hmm.
describe it. The core
Hmm.
12 on a team.
Hmm.
You got to get one core 12 player every year in the draft. The Oilers got one, Taylor Hall,
Hmm.
first
Yeah.
overall. Brandon Davidson has been okay. Like, that's a good late round pick. Like, he's been a
Hmm.
journeyman NHLer, but geez.
Yeah. No
Ah,
clear wins. You need wins. Don't need sort of, well, we got two or three guys that were on the cusp of the league. You need someone that just surprises and outperforms and comes from
yeah.
somewhere in the depths of the draft to become a difference maker in the NHL. It's a long list of Oilers that you can go through that weren't first round picks
I
that
just
really
want to
haven't done that.
let's just look. Just the last thing I'm going to do here is look for a core 12 player taken outside the first round. So on the Oilers, so the only ones that have a chance,
Hmm.
the only ones. Let's not talk about the recent drafts because it's too early to
Right.
tell. So 2015, Baron Marino. Marino has a
Yep.
chance to stick. So a core 12 player for 5 years,
Right.
let's say, is a hit. He's got a chance to do that, and so does Ethan Bear.
Sure does.
Um,
Yep.
so before then, Bruce, we're looking. So Eric Gustafson in the 2012 draft, core 12.
250
No,
games in the NHL, but he's a third pairing guy in the NHL,
yeah. So
specialist.
outside of the first round, we got to go way back to,
Yeah.
and I'm still going back. Riley Nash does not qualify as core 12.
Nope.
Uh,
Keep
we're
going.
keep going.
Jeff
We're going
Petrie.
where I'm on
Jeff,
2000 and
Jeff Petrie's second round pick in 2006.
there we go. It's been 14 years,
15.
Bruce. Now we could say Marino and Bear. So
Yeah.
15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Since you can say with certainty,
Mm-hmm.
the Oilers drafted a core 12 player
Yeah. Jeff
after the
Petrie is
first round.
definitely a core 12 player. He certainly
And that
became one after he left Edmonton, if he wasn't already.
he was definitely already. And before Jeff Petrie,
Yeah. Keep
maybe
going.
Kyle Brodziak. Was he a third
Yeah.
line? I
Yeah.
don't think
Maybe he
so.
was a 3C, but
Okay,
yeah.
you got to go back to the 2012 draft where you hit Jarrett Stoll. He's taken in the second round,
2002.
36 overall. He was definitely a core 12 player for more than 5 years. The Oilers have just sucked at drafting. They
Mm-hmm.
just were terrible,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why the Oilers went through the decade of darkness. And the only way they'll get out of this decade, the only way they're going to turn this franchise around is for these guys
Oh.
to get it right. And it looks like maybe in the last five
Mm-hmm.
years they're going to get some core 12 players out of that, but
And
yet to be known.
as we've discussed and as you've written about, I mean, the difference between the pro scouts and the amateur scouts is that you get kind of instant feedback on the guys that pro scouts bring in. You know, we knew a lot about Kyle Turris within about 2 weeks of the season starting, whereas you have to wait 3, 4, 5, 7 years for these draft picks to really sometimes show, what they got. I mean, Oilers drafted William Lagesson 7 years ago, and we still don't know what we got, right? Oh,
We still don't know.
no,
We can probably say with starting to get a sense he's not going to be core 12.
right. I think that's fair.
Um, I think that's fair to say. I mean, it's still there's an outside chance, but probably was when he got that chance this year. Probably was going to seize that job,
Right.
and we didn't see that kind of seizure. All right, thanks for talking today, Bruce.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.